world. The world is on fire. The noose is tightening. And my God, my God, my God, so many things are happening. So you can check out Harley's work over at LaRouchePack.com and over at theschillerinstitute.org. And with that being said, Harley, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. I'm just glad I'm not John Brennan.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Of all the things that are happening, of all the distractions that are taking place right now, let's talk about Brennan. Let's talk about and how that noose is tightening and how this plays out to the bigger agenda that is happening right now, Harley, where, my God, I mean, it's not just Brennan. I mean, Clapper's getting nervous. Obama's getting nervous. Susan Rice Aroni is getting nervous. I mean, let's dive right into it. Go for it.
Well, the other person who should be getting nervous is Joe Biden.
And yep. You mean the shadow president of Ukraine?
Yeah, we've been joking about Joe as a federal witness protection program type who's hiding in a basement or being hidden in a basement. But what happened last week is that a prosecutor in Ukraine announced that Biden is under investigation and they want him to come to Ukraine for a deposition on the question of whether or not he interfered with a prosecutor who is looking into the Burisma case. Now, the specific charge is that Biden disrupted or interrupted the investigation by Shokin, Victor Shokin, who was the prosecutor.
Right.
Biden bragged about getting fired. And Biden, of course, the media backed him up on this. Biden said, well, everyone said he was corrupt, and so we were just doing what everyone wanted us to do. Well, that's not exactly true. One of the things that came out is a letter from the State Department from 2015 praising Shokin for his anti-corruption investigations. So here we have Biden justifying the threat that $1 billion in a loan would be withheld from Ukraine unless Shokin is fired. And he said he has to be fired within 6 hours before I leave Kiev, or else you're not going to get the money. So Poroshenko, being loyal to Biden, fired him. And now it turns out that he was not corrupt. In fact, the State Department had also been praising him for his investigations of corruption. Now, whether that had to do with Hunter Biden or not, I don't know. But this is kind of interesting, isn't it? That the Biden case comes up in such a big way as the Democrats are preparing to anoint him as the candidate to take on Trump in November. And it's especially interesting because so much effort was spent to try and impeach Trump, and he was impeached, but to try and throw him out of office on the charge that he was extorting the president of Ukraine by withholding funds, which of course Trump did not withhold. Whereas we now have the evidence from Biden himself that he was withholding money unless they fired this prosecutor who was looking into the company, which coincidentally his son was hired and paid very well to represent. So this becomes an interesting new aspect of the presidential campaign. Now, when you look at the Brennan question, I mean, Brennan was part of the Ukraine operation. Remember, Biden was the point man for Obama, and the CIA and the National Endowment for Democracy and the State Department were heavily involved in working with neo-Nazi militia to overthrow the Ukrainian
election.
Yeah, in 2014.
Right.
And then it was the Poroshenko regime that Biden was threatening. So it becomes very interesting. I think poor old Joe may not get a chance to run.
If Biden, if that plane, that dilapidated DC-3 that is Biden is it's chugging along, trying to make its way into the runway, and it can't take off. Who do you think is basically the heir apparent in this regard, Harley?
Well, I think there was some hope that they could take this Amy Klobuchar and insert her, but it looks as though now she's going to go down in flames with this Minnesota riots that are taking place. Right. There's more talk about Kamala Harris, but she's a rotten person also. I mean, if you're talking about how to get the black vote for the Democrats, the last two people you want are Klobuchar or Harris, because the two of them were prosecutors who put a lot of innocent, or if not innocent, certainly not criminal African Americans into the prison system. Then you've got Biden himself, who goes on a radio show and says, "If you're
If you
not going
don't
to,
vote for me, you ain't black.
you ain't black." And Trump, you probably saw this. Did
Oh,
someone?
the meme,
Yeah, they have these.
dancing coffin.
Yep, you have these nasty-looking guys coming on saying, "Who you saying ain't black, white boy?"
Yep, exactly.
So I think they're. It seems to me that the people running the Democratic Party used Biden to make sure that Bernie Sanders wouldn't go anywhere. And of course, they didn't have to worry about it because Bernie shot himself in both feet and in the mouth.
Right.
So once they got Biden, they're sort of stuck with him. Now, I think they've probably got some other idea in mind. I'm still not ruling out the possibility that they might go with Bloomberg, although Bloomberg showed in his brief appearance on the campaign trail that he's got nothing.
He's he it would be a bloodletting if they let. They can literally run no one if they if they try to run Biden. It's a oh my god, it'll be a laugh fest. If they try to run Bloomberg, I mean he has
You have Andrew Cuomo, or
he
don't.
knows better. He's got a scandal brewing with this nursing home stuff. That I'll
Well,
tell you.
he's terrible, yeah. And then you've got in the background Michelle Obama.
Yep, you still got Michelle. You got Michael LaVaughn Robinson
Yeah.
and Hillary Clinton. Still in the
And
background.
the only way that could work would be in a totally scorched earth campaign of race riots, murders going on,
Well, they're
chaos.
trying to do that right now.
Well, they are, because it doesn't look as though the pandemic is going to sink Trump, although
No.
you never know what's going to happen in the weeks and months ahead. But what have the Democrats said about it?
I mean, Bill Gates is working diligently, Harley, to make sure that there's a second wave.
Well, they may be doing that, but this can also backfire, because if Trump is clever, he'll make the point that it was the Bush and Obama policies, especially Obamacare, that weakened the healthcare sector. So if there is a
Yeah.
second wave, you don't point the finger at China, point it at Obama. Obama's the one who bears a lot of responsibility for this. And then, of course, you also have the Durham investigation, which, I think people are tired of waiting. But you know what? Sometimes if you wait long enough, you get what you want.
Yes. What do we have going on with the Durham investigation? The noose is tightening around Brennan. Clapper is literally running with his dentures out of his mouth, trying to get out of Dodge as quick as possible. The rats are fleeing the ship as quickly as they possibly can. What's your latest intel, Harley?
Well, Clapper's trying to cover up for his direct involvement by saying he doesn't hear very well. He's hard of hearing.
That's right.
But
Oh, that's a good excuse.
he,
He's also
he
hard of thinking.
he did hear what he said when he said there's no metadata collection.
Right.
And he tried to say, well, I misspoke. That's not exactly what I meant. That's what is threatening to put Roger Stone in prison for 3.5 years, that kind of thing. But I think here's the latest I know, that Trump is not going to give up. He's not going to back off. Neither will Attorney General Barr. Now, that doesn't mean that Barr is impatient. I think what Barr is expecting is that Trump is going to win re-election, possibly with the help of these investigations, which may come out toward the end of the summer. The reports on them anyway, possibly indictments and so on. But they're looking at this as a longer term process of cleaning out the swamp. And this is one of the reasons they're getting rid of some of the inspector generals. This is also why you see the Justice Department, 2,000 former members coming out attacking Barr. So for those people who think Barr is the deep state, he's not going to do anything, I think you should take a look at these panicked 2,000 former Justice Department employees who are part of the permanent bureaucracy,
Correct.
who are reacting hysterically to what Barr did in the Michael Flynn case, because the
Yep.
writing's on the wall. Now, here's the only problem, excuse me, with a lot of this. Where do you try someone who's part of the deep state? Mostly it's in Northern Virginia or Washington. And you've got a jury pool which is minimally highly tainted, as we saw in the Roger Stone case. I'm
Correct.
not sure what to do about that,
I'm
but
thinking military tribunal because this is treason.
well, there's some people suggesting that.
I
And
think it's the only logical thing, Harley, because
well,
you can't go to a jury pool. The jury pool around in and around D.C. and Virginia is a hotbed of corrupt Democrat, far leftist, statist, deep staters.
yeah, it gives you the home court advantage. We saw that in the LaRouche case.
Absolutely, it's a total kangaroo court. We can't let
Yeah,
that happen. And this, let's be honest here. When Odumbo left office, he left in place the National Defense Authorization Act. He left in place the Patriot Act, right? He left in place executive orders that were in place to quote unquote go after U.S. citizens on U.S. soil for subversive as well as treasonous as well as terroristic activities. And I think this falls under that category. It's treason, and it's treason by people that are in law enforcement positions, that are in government positions. And I think that warrants. There's enough material there that if these guys got the guts to do it, it could easily fall into a military tribunal. Go ahead, Harley.
well, I'm not sure it would be so easy because the one problem with treason is that part of the statutory procedure requires that they're operating on behalf of enemies of the country. Now, this is where it becomes interesting because the people who are doing these things were working with people in the Five Eyes intelligence, which is the British directed Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and what's the other one? The United Kingdom. It also, there's an Italian side of this that George Papadopoulos is exposing. There's an Australian side. So you easily could show that these are enemies of the United States, not as declared enemies, but as people who are operating against US national interests. So I think that's how you'd have to proceed, excuse me, proceed with the treason charge. But with me, for me, the more important question is winning the battle with the American people. Because to me, the most important thing is getting these guys away from any position of power. Uh,
Right.
if you can't put them in jail, if you can't shoot them, take them away, get their hands off the institutions of our executive branch and the military, the defense, intelligence community, because they have done enormous damage to the country. And the idea of draining the swamp is still one that's very popular with a lot of people. And the good thing is that people are now beginning to put faces on the swamp dwellers. They're not just rats that are able to hide out in camouflage and underwater. Their faces are on television. People know who they are. And so I think we're at a point where the exposure is going to be too great for any of them to be effective in directing policy in the future. Now, I know some people would like to see them suffer. Well, I'm less interested in having them suffer than just seeing them completely removed from power. I think that in itself uh, would be great suffering. Although I would like to see John Brennan in an orange jumpsuit.
Yeah, I think there's so much there with just Brennan, his involvement with creating this character, this composite character named Barry Soetoro, aka Barack Hussein Obama. The close links between Brennan and the Saudis, the close links between Brennan and many jihadi radicals, the close links between Brennan and numerous amounts of deep staters that are within and without DC. I mean, my God, there's so much material there with this guy that him, if he doesn't wind up in an orange jumpsuit, Harley, I would be very surprised.
Well, and this is where the rehabilitation of Michael Flynn becomes important because as long as Flynn is still there with the sword of Damocles being held by Judge Emmett Sullivan, his ability to say what he knows is limited. But, and this is, by the way, why they won't let go, even though the Justice Department said drop his case. But sooner or later, Michael Flynn is going to be freed to speak. And when he does, we're going to see something very similar to what we're beginning to see with Roger Stone. I mean, Roger did a really interesting interview the other day, and he was asked about the role of Steve Bannon. And Roger pointed out that Bannon said completely contradictory things in his testimony before the House Permanent Intelligence Committee, where he said at that point that he had no evidence of Roger Stone as an operative of the Trump campaign connected to WikiLeaks or the Russians. But then in the courtroom, he said the opposite. He said Roger was the link between WikiLeaks, the Russians, and the Trump campaign. Well, which was it? In any case, Bannon is another person who, at this point,
I mean, what's his ilk? The thing with Steve, it's like, I get, I like what he does with the whole nationalistic populism. I get it. I like it. But then again, it's like he's stuck on stupid on other topics and other matters of the state. Absolutely stuck on stupid. What's his stick, Harley? Like, what is he doing?
Well, he's got a British connection, very
Right.
profound British connection, and also right-wing Vatican connection. And if
Correct.
anyone knows anything about the right wing of the Vatican and its relationship with the British royal family, bingo, you got it. Look, he was given a monastery in Italy that's owned by the Catholic Church to conduct recruitment operations to try to sideswipe the whole nationalist movement in Italy. He worked closely for a while with Brexit through a guy named Raheem Kassem, who
Yeah,
is
the Anglophile,
podcast partner.
the Arab Anglophile.
Now, Raheem was a top operative of the Henry Jackson Society. What's
Yep,
the Henry
strong links to
Jackson
Breitbart.
Society? Well, Breitbart, but more importantly, when the Project for a New American Century was shut down, most of the people in it went and formed the Henry Jackson Society.
Correct.
So it's the neocon Bush connection. And that's why Bannon wasn't with Trump when Trump got started. He was with who? Lying Ted Cruz, funded by
Yeah.
the Mercers. So, I'm doing some investigation into
Right. The Mercers have been a very close confidant of Bannon for quite a number of years. The billionaire family, the Mercers, and they've been, ardent what's the word, supporters of what Steve does and that agenda.
Yeah. And Bannon also has a very close connection to people in China who are involved in the insurrection in Hong Kong. Now, I know there's some people who are now saying, oh, look, China's doing a crackdown on Hong Kong. This is a violation of the original agreement. Actually, it's not. The original agreement that was signed between the British and the Chinese has an annex, Annex 3, which says that the Chinese government has a right to intervene if there is evidence of foreign subversion acting in Hong Kong. In other words, you have this idea of one country, two systems. And the Chinese Communist Party is supposed to keep its hands off the banking sector and the financial sector, which they have done. But they're not supposed to turn their back if there's foreign subversion. Well, who's the foreign subversion? It's people like Bannon, like Kyle Bass, the hedge fund operator from Dallas, who keeps betting shorting the yuan. But who
Yeah.
else is involved? George Soros, and a group of people around Soros from his Open Society who are opposing China for what reason? They don't like China's economic development perspective because China is moving toward an alternative system to the speculative casino economy, which is run by the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the global banksters. And that's part of what Bannon's shtick is. He claims to be for free enterprise. Uh, at the same time, he says he's against the free trade agreements. I think you'll find a lot of contradiction in Bannon, but it's hard to bring it out because I don't know if you've seen it, but every time he's interviewed by Maria Bartiromo or one of the Fox fawning anchors, whenever they find something that's at all difficult for him to answer, he just shouts over them.
No, he does, and they think this guy. Look, I respect. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about.
Hey, V, here's the thing. Bannon took credit for getting Trump elected, and that pissed Trump off because Bannon came in late. He was with Cruz.
Correct.
Bannon then was involved in the operation against Roger Stone. Why is that important? Because Roger was someone who said that Lyndon LaRouche provided the backdrop for the Trump campaign.
Right.
Now, that means that Bannon was consciously, in my opinion, operating against LaRouche and my organization. Now, there's another factor here when it comes to China. We've been working, as you know, fairly closely with Bill Binney to expose the fraud of the Russian meddling charges.
Correct.
Binney or Pompeo was asked when he was CIA director by Donald Trump to meet with Binney to see what evidence Binney has. They had a meeting, Binney and Pompeo, and Pompeo never said a word about it. Well, it turns out now that we see Sean Henry from CrowdStrike admitting that they never had a shred of evidence of Russian hacking, that Binney was right. And Binney met with Pompeo in November or December of 2017, which means that Binney, that Pompeo covered up the truth about Russiagate. So those people who see Bannon and Pompeo as strong supporters of Donald Trump ought to realize that the two of them intervened in the case against Binney and in the case against Roger Stone, not just to keep the lies of the deep state alive, but to cut off connections between the Trump administration and the LaRouche movement.
Correct. And there's a strong link. And like you said before, there's a strong link between Bannon, Bass, British intel, British royalty, and the Vatican. Very strong link there.
Yeah. So I think this paints an interesting picture because not only did they try to get rid of Trump, but they were trying to make sure that Trump was surrounded by people who were saying what the British wanted him to hear. Remember the ambassador, Sir Kim Darroch, who was sending these nasty notes back to Whitehall, the British Foreign Office, about Trump. One of the things he said is we want to flood the zone around Trump, surround him with what Darroch called Trump whisperers, who present the British view of what the US should be doing. Among those people that Darroch was meeting with was Steve Bannon and former Chief of Staff John Kelly. So again, you see British subversion working with these hardcore right-wing Vatican networks. It doesn't exactly present a picture of a conservative sovereigntist that Bannon likes to pretend he is.
Sure. And now, look, here's the thing, Harley. I mean, we got a lot of anti-China rhetoric globally. Recently, in the Ladakh Valley in northern India near Jammu Kashmir, you've had the border skirmish yet again between Chinese and Indian forces. You have the saber rattling that is happening in Japan, where they're fostering and bolstering their naval presence in the East China Sea. You have Taiwan being recognized globally. You're having 122 countries that are signed on right now, saying that China is behind the COVID-19 release and to investigate them. You have a lot of pressure like I've never seen before on one country all of a sudden. And it almost is being, and I'm taking a step back, looking at it in a very objective way. And it's very much like a reinvention of the Cold War 2.0, where you have the Soviet Union being called the evil empire, And I think the same marketing materials dusted off, and now it's being, they white labeled the Russia, and they masked it over, and they put China in place of it. It's like they've dusted it off, and they're using it again. Harley, what's your take on all of this, especially the recent border skirmish between India and China?
Well, I think the Indians and the Chinese are sitting down and talking about that. And I think this has a lot to do with the question of India and Pakistan and the Kashmir issue. So there's a lot more involved than that, than meets the eye. But in terms of the anti-China stuff, I don't think you have to go back to the beginnings of the Cold War to get a sense of where this is coming from. They tried it with Russiagate, and eventually the American people saw through it. What's going to happen? And by the way, the nations that signed on to an investigation aren't accusing China. The 123 nations aren't accusing China. They're just saying they want it investigated. Pompeo is saying they are accusing China. So there's a difference between the actual wording of what was done with this World Health Association meeting recently and how the State Department is presenting it. But what will happen if a year from now it becomes clear that what Pompeo and others are saying against China is as false as the Steele dossier and what's being said about Russia? The problem is that by the time we find out that they were lying, we might already have been in a war. So instead of rushing to judgment, and in this case, the Americans, wanted to end these wars. That's why they elected Trump. And you notice that while Trump is ratcheting up the rhetoric a little bit against China, he's not fully in support of breaking with China, because we're continuing to negotiate the next step of the trade deal.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, Harley, what people don't understand, in order for there to be global peace and global prosperity, you need to have a trade deal with the United States and China. The two largest economies have to work in cohesion. The two biggest powers have to work in unison. You don't have to like everything that China does. You might not agree with everything that China does. Does China have its problems? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, if your goal is prosperity of the United States, if your goal is prosperity globally, you got to have China in the equation. It's inevitable. Right, Harley?
Absolutely right. And just to add one more factor to it, here you have people who have launched wars all over the world. And I'm talking about the CIA, the so-called deep state, saying that China is being aggressive because they put a couple of ships in the dock at Djibouti. The fact of the matter is that we have, I think, in 170 something countries, we have
934 plus military bases globally.
Yeah.
And I mean, think about this, and this is what pisses me off, Harley. We are looking at the tiny speck of dust in our neighbor's eye, and we do not see this California redwood sticking out from our own eye sockets. And that is the fact. The fact is, China has a tiny little base in Djibouti. Big deal. They have little tiny outcroppings in sparse coral reefs that they've created into man-made islands in the middle of the South China Sea. Big deal. We have 934 plus military bases globally. We have spent in the last decade alone $27 trillion that we know of. I estimate, and I've talked to quite a few people that are in DC, Harley, and the closer estimate is closer to maybe 45 to 50 trillion. We wasted generations of wealth on globalism. We've wasted generations of wealth on needless wars, international spelunking, covert operations. We've been running this economy ragged on fumes, and then in the end of this whole entire thing, we're pointing the finger at China. It's ridiculous.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, V. And I think the question is, will the American people figure out the China question the way they did the Russia question or not? And what this will determine is whether we end up in some kind of extended confrontation, which may not be military, but will further drag the U.S. economy into the gutter.
Absolutely.
And that's what people like Pompeo, whether he's conscious or not, that's what the British want. That's what they're trying to do.
Of course.
Destroy the uniqueness of the American system.
Yes, absolutely, 100,000% correct. And it's you got guys like Pompeo, a man who's been out there on live TV saying, "Yeah, when we were in the CIA, we did everything to lie, cheat, and cheat and steal." And you can't trust somebody like that. They have a different agenda. And guys, let me explain something to you. It's you. There are four global powers, and the global elitists know this, and they play us one off the other, and they make sure that we never work in harmony or in cohesion. And those four global powers: the United States, Russia, China, and India. You cannot have any sort of economic prosperity, global world peace without these four powers working cohesion. So, and I think Trump understands this. That's why it's like we need that trade agreement with the Chinese.
Let's go one step further.
Yeah.
Those are the four countries that are strong enough to overcome the blackmail of the globalist financial institutions trying to keep us in a bankrupt global system where we no longer have sovereignty. And we know how these globalists treat sovereign nations. Look at Libya, look at Iraq, look at Syria. Look what they would like to do to the United States if they could. So we need these other countries who have the power with the United States to overcome the blackmail and the threats from the globalists and actually create a new monetary system that's not controlled by swindlers.
Correct. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. If it has to stop. I think people need to start thinking with a critical brain, and this infantile, sophomoric mindset that is plaguing much of the American population needs to be dusted off. Otherwise, it's not going to end well. And I'm hoping that it ends great.
I just did an article with the headline, how can you reopen an economy which no longer exists? And I just pointed out that beginning in September, we saw the bubble pop. And the only reason the bubble in the United States has not fully popped is because of $4 trillion of money from the Federal Reserve to back up worthless financial instruments. The opening of the economy requires the United States to get on a different footing where we're investing in physical economy, we're rebuilding our manufacturing base. It won't work overnight. But if you do it together with China in the context of the next phase of the trade deal, then we can restore the supply chains.
Yep, absolutely correct. I mean, just recently, the Trump administration just announced that they're going to cut off all access to the ARM microchips for Huawei. And for those that don't know, ARM or ARM Cortex microchips are what's basically the architecture. And here's what's funny, Harley. The ARM microchips are the backbone architecture for every mobile device, whether it's your laptops that are running mobile processors, your cell phones, your tablets, you name it, is the next generation. And everybody, Apple, Samsung, Apple with their Bionic chips, Samsung with their Exynos processors, Qualcomm with their Snapdragon processors, Huawei with their Kirin processors, they all are running the architecture that's put out by ARM. Now, Trump announced that all supplies for ARM processors should be cut from Huawei, which is terrible because I've said this a billion one times. I've owned Huawei phones. They're the most secure phones you could have. They are superior to your iPhones. They are superior to your Samsungs. I can tell you that firsthand. They're amazing, amazing phones, incredible build quality, the best cameras in the business. You don't know what a camera technology is until you mess with a Huawei. And battery life, my God, forget about it. But here's the funny thing, Harley. Who is ARM? It's British. It's a British company. Yep. And why would they cut off Huawei? And Huawei, who their 5G, their security risk. And Huawei said, we're a security risk. Well, here's the source code for our 5G network, and we've made it open source. You can take it. We don't care. We welcome the competition. Oh, Huawei's stealing trade secrets from us, from Apple. Huawei's putting out technology that is generations ahead of anything that stupid company Cupertino does, Harley. Generations ahead of that fruit company in Cupertino. And they're saying that, how can you steal something if you're putting out stuff that's 2 generations ahead of anybody else? How are you stealing? No, they're innovating. They're a threat. And that's when I knew this whole thing is fake. And it's been ratcheting up and it's been intensifying. Okay, China released the COVID virus. Okay, if China released the COVID virus, what is the next immediate country that got affected right after China? And why was it all the leaders in that parliament that was affected? Iran.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. It's gone past the point of ridiculous. We're throwing our logic out the window here, Harley. The American public is believing idiots like Pompeo, believing guys like Bannon, and it's infuriating to see this.
I'm not sure they are. I think the problem is there's no alternative voice.
Correct.
Because you look at both parties and they're marching in lockstep. Here's where Pelosi and Feinstein and others join with the war hawks in the Republican Party. We saw it on the vote in Syria against Trump to withdraw troops. We saw it in the opposition to the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. There's one war party, whether you call it the military industrial complex, the deep state, whatever you call it, it's a war party that has its tentacles controlling it from the United Kingdom. And until we recognize that that's where the threat is coming from, we're highly susceptible to the psychological operations they're running against the United States and the American people.
Yep. Exactly correct. Exactly correct. Anyway, it's sickening. Harley, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all this information with us. Folks, again, go to the schillerinstitute.org. Check it out. Harley has daily 5-minute updates that he gives on the geopolitical and geostrategic. And go there. And Harley, if you want to give out your contact information, how people could reach you for questions, go ahead.
Well, the place to see my daily updates, which are about 10 minutes, is LaRouche Pack on YouTube. Go to YouTube and type in LaRouche Pack videos. And if you want to discuss things, have dialogue with me, just send me an email at harleysch@gmail.com. That's my personal email, harleysch@gmail.com.
Perfect. And Harley, thank you so much for joining us. And folks, enjoy your weekends as we, again, continue to walk the precipice with one foot on the edge and another foot on the banana peel. This is the Gorilla and Harley, and we are out.